USS Nevada was as tough and resilient as any battleship to ever plow through the seas for the U.S. Navy. She ushered in the second generation of U.S. battleship design, or the standard type battleship, and introduced revolutionary new design features that became standard on most of the battleships that followed her. Nevada was the only battleship to get underway during the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, and her actions were a bright spot in an otherwise dismal morning for the United States Navy. After recovering from her damage, her guns blasted away enemy coastal defenses in France before she moved on to the Pacific. Fire from her guns was deadly accurate, and she was very dependable in the fire support role. She earned 7 battle stars for her actions during the Second World War. As the first of her class, and of the 12 standard-type battleships that would be built by the U.S. Navy, Nevada was a major step forward in the evolution of U.S. battleship design. She introduced new technology like triple gun turrets, oil-fired boilers, geared steam turbines, and the all-or-nothing armor scheme. Her keel was laid on November 4, 1912 by the Four River Shipbuilding Company in Quincy, Massachusetts, and she was launched less than 2 years later on July 11, 1914. Nevada had an overall length of 583 feet, a beam of 95 feet, and she had a standard displacement of 27,500 tons. She carried a main battery of 10 14-inch 45 caliber guns arranged in 2 twin and 2 triple turrets, with the twin turrets super-firing over the triples. She was the first U.S. battleship to use a triple turret design, which eliminated the need for the amidships turrets found on her predecessors. Her guns fired a 1,400-pound armor-piercing shell at a muzzle velocity of 2,600 feet per second, and they could be elevated to 15 degrees or depressed to -5 degrees. At maximum elevation, Nevada could throw shell fire about 21,000 yards or almost 12 miles. Her secondary battery consisted of 21 individually mounted 5-inch 51 caliber guns. 12 of these were in casemates forward, 6 on either side, and another 6 were in casemates toward the stern, with another one mounted directly at the stern. These proved to be excessively wet in anything but calm seas and were frequently unusable. Nevada also had torpedo tubes below her waterline on each broadside, and just before her commissioning, she was equipped with a pair of 3-inch 50 caliber anti-aircraft guns. Where Nevada's design truly was revolutionary, though, was in the creation and implementation of the all-or-nothing armor scheme. All-or-nothing armor focused on protecting the vital areas of a battleship: her magazines, machinery, and command spaces, with the maximum amount of armor possible, while the rest of the ship received little to none. This required a complete rethinking of battleship design, and U.S. naval architects had to examine every system and function of a warship to determine which were critical and needed to be protected within the armor citadel. Nevada was the first battleship design of any navy in the world to use this armor scheme, and the idea was eventually adopted by most of the major navies that operated battleships. She had a main armor belt of 13.5 inches, protecting her vital areas, and deck armor 3 inches thick. Her barbettes were protected by 13 inches of armor, and her 4 turrets were extremely well protected. The 2 triple turrets had 18 inches of armor on their faces, and the twins had slightly less at 16 inches. Another revolutionary aspect of Nevada's design was her propulsion system. With Nevada, the U.S. Navy made the change to oil-fired boilers and geared steam turbines, which were much more efficient than coal-fired boilers and direct-drive turbines. This increased her fuel economy and range over previous designs. Nevada had a pair of geared steam turbines that each drove one shaft using the steam provided by 12 oil-fired boilers. She was rated for 26,500 shaft horsepower and had a top speed of 20.5 knots. Nevada could cruise 8,000 nautical miles at 10 knots, although these numbers fell dramatically under service conditions. Nevada commissioned into the fleet on March 11, 1916, and after her fitting-out period, joined the fleet in late May. She spent the next 2 years training and cruising off the U.S. East Coast, initially being held stateside after U.S. entry into the First World War, due to a shortage of oil in Britain. She finally crossed the Atlantic in late August 1918 to join the war effort, where she operated out of Berehaven, Ireland, in company with Oklahoma and Utah, until the end of the war that November. The 3 American battle wagons escorted convoys heading for the British Isles, protecting them from the threat of German surface units. The Germans never came out, and Nevada never got the chance to engage the enemy during the war. In December, Nevada helped escort President Woodrow Wilson to the Paris Peace Conference in France before heading for home waters, where she arrived in New York on December 26th to much fanfare. In mid-1919, Nevada had her secondary battery reduced. Her 7 aft 5-inch guns were removed, along with her 2 most forward ones due to the overly wet nature of their positions and the inability to use them outside of calm sea conditions. She also received flying-off platforms for aircraft on both of her super-firing turrets. These proved to be very problematic, though, as her guns destroyed the platforms whenever they were fired, and they limited the ability of the guns to be elevated and depressed. After this refit, Nevada spent much of the early and mid-1920s splitting her time between the Pacific and Atlantic, conducting training, goodwill visits, and periodic yard visits for minor overhauls and refits. In September 1927, Nevada arrived at the Norfolk Navy Yard, where she would be until January 1930, undergoing a $7 million modernization. Her lattice cage masts were replaced by 2 tripod masts, and she had a new superstructure installed. Anti-torpedo blisters were added, which increased her beam to 107 feet, and her torpedo tubes were welded over. She also received new turbines and traded in her 12 oil-fired boilers for 6 new, more efficient ones that increased her range considerably. This also saved a considerable amount of weight, which was used to increase her deck armor by 2 inches and add the torpedo blisters. Her main battery's elevation was increased to 30 degrees, which increased their range to 34,000 yards, and 2 catapults were added for spotter aircraft, one on her fantail and the other on the top of turret 3. She received 8 50 caliber machine guns and 8 5-inch 25 caliber guns for her anti-aircraft battery, and had her remaining 5-inch 51 caliber secondary battery guns relocated above the hull, in a similar location to that of the New Mexico class. The alterations increased Nevada's standard displacement to 30,500 and her crew to 1,374. When she left the yard after all this work was completed, she was just about a completely new ship. After her modernization, she was assigned to the U.S. Pacific Fleet, which at that point was stationed in San Pedro, California. She spent the majority of the 1930s training along the West Coast and in Hawaiian waters, along with the occasional foray into the Caribbean while participating in the yearly fleet exercises known as fleet problems. She had routine overhauls during this time period, but nothing major other than the addition of an SC air search radar set in 1941. In March 1941, Nevada got underway for her new home port at Pearl Harbor as tensions with the Japanese began to rise, and she spent much of the following months conducting training in the waters between Hawaii and the West Coast. On December 7, 1941, Nevada was moored off Ford Island in Pearl Harbor, just behind USS Arizona, when Japanese planes appeared overhead just before 8 o'clock that morning. The ship's band had just begun to play morning colors as her flag was raised for the day, when general quarters were sounded, and within minutes her crew was ready for a fight. Her machine gunners and 5-inch batteries opened up on enemy torpedo planes as they began to make their runs on her port beam just after 8. One plane was downed by her intense AA barrage, but another dropped a torpedo which struck Nevada on her port bow. The bulkhead in that area held, but leaking occurred which resulted in a 5-degree list to port. This was soon corrected by counter-flooding thanks to the quick reaction of her damage control parties, and at 8:06, Nevada was showered in debris from Arizona when her magazine exploded from a bomb hit. The officer of the deck that morning, Ensign Joe Tausig, had ordered a second boiler to be lit as he planned to switch the power load from one boiler to the other around 8. This action allowed her engine room to build up steam quickly, and with the freedom of movement afforded Nevada by the lack of another ship next to her, she was underway by 8:40. At this point, her gunners had already downed 4 enemy planes, and with her anti-aircraft battery still blazing away at enemy aircraft, Nevada made her way down the channel in an attempt to escape the harbor and break out into open water. As she did, however, she became the prime target of the dive bombers arriving in the second wave. As she steamed down the channel, Nevada was struck in quick succession by 5 bombs, and, as it became evident that she was rendered combat ineffective by the damage and fires from these hits, she was ordered to get clear of the main channel to prevent her from sinking in it. She couldn't make it to the west side of Ford Island, where she had been ordered to, and instead was grounded off Hospital Point. Nevada's gunners had managed to down 3 more planes before she came to a stop along the shore. Later on in the day, she was moved by harbor tugs to avoid bottlenecking the channel. When it was all over, Nevada had been hit by a total of at least 6 bombs and 1 torpedo. 50 men were killed and 109 more wounded. Ensign Taussig was awarded the Navy Cross for his actions and lost his leg after being severely wounded during the unprovoked surprise attack. Nevada had some luck on her side at Pearl that day. She was damaged for sure, but she was not nearly as bad off as West Virginia, California, Oklahoma, and of course Arizona. As luck would have it, in the days prior to the attack, Nevada's crew had been replacing her 14-inch shells with a new heavier shell. All of her shells and powder had been removed from her magazines, and her crew had taken a break after loading the new projectiles, with the intention of loading the new powder charges on Sunday. This prevented a catastrophe similar to that of Arizona's magazine explosion, when she was struck near Turret 1 as she made her run down the channel. As it was, though, Nevada still needed much attention and was refloated from the harbor floor on February 12, 1942. Temporary repairs were effected so she could make the trip to the Puget Sound Navy Yard for permanent repairs and a modernization. Her $23 million overhaul and modernization was completed by October 1942. Her battle damage was repaired and all of her pre-war 5-inch guns were replaced with 16 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose guns. These were located amidships in 8 twin-barreled turrets, 4 on each broadside. The addition of these weapons dramatically changed the old battle wagon's appearance so that she somewhat resembled the new fast battleship South Dakota. Her light AA battery was updated as well, with several quadruple Bofors mounts and single-mount Oerlikon autocannons replacing her pre-war weapons. She also received upgrades to her radar and communication equipment. By May of 1943, Nevada was ready to rejoin the fight in the Pacific, and she moved north to provide fire support for the landings on Attu Island off the Alaskan coast. She was then dispatched to Norfolk for further modernization work. Nevada then began convoy duty in the North Atlantic during the summer of 1943, where she guarded against possible sorties by German capital ships, and continued in this role until April 1944, when she arrived in British waters to prepare for the invasion of France. She was chosen as flagship for the invasion and provided fire support to forces ashore at Normandy from June 6th through the 17th, firing 926 14-inch and 3,491 5-inch rounds in support of the invasion. On the 25th, she participated in the bombardment of Cherbourg, where she employed her guns against shore defenses on the Cherbourg Peninsula. Nevada got into a rolling gunfight with several German coastal batteries and fired shells as far as 20 miles inland in attempts to break up troop concentrations and counterattacks. She was straddled by counter-battery fire over 20 times but never hit. Nevada fired 112, 14-inch and 985, 5-inch rounds by the time the day was over. After her work in the Normandy area was finished, Nevada moved on to support the landings in southern France at Toulon in late August. Her first assignment here was to level the fortress at Saint-Mandrier-sur-Mer, which was equipped with 4 13-inch naval guns in 2 twin turrets. These guns had been salvaged from the French battleship Provence after the scuttling of the French fleet, and they had a range of nearly 19 nautical miles and commanded every approach to the port. Beginning on August 19th, heavy warships bombarded the fortress in conjunction with bomber strikes. Nevada engaged the German-manned French battleship Strasbourg, hitting her aft and causing her to list to starboard. Nevada then hit all the fortified gun emplacements of the fortress. She spent the next several days engaging shore batteries in the area that were harassing U.S. supply ships entering recently liberated Marseille harbor. After having to make corrections to compensate for her worn-out gun barrels, Nevada destroyed 3 batteries, put a 4th out of action, and partially disabled a 5th. Lastly, she destroyed an enemy turret on a cliff top overlooking the harbor entrance. With her work done off the coast of southern France, she retired and headed for the States, arriving in Norfolk in mid-September for an overhaul. She headed for the Pacific in late November and rendezvoused with the fleet in the Caroline Islands on January 23, 1945. Nevada didn't have to wait long for a business opportunity, as she got underway on February 10th to participate in the landings at Iwo Jima. She arrived off Iwo Jima on the 16th, and just after 7 a.m., fired her first salvo at the Japanese defenders. Bad weather hampered operations the next day, but conditions improved on the 18th, and the bombardment of Iwo Jima began again in earnest. Nevada moved to a mere 3,000 yards off the beach at one point, and late in the day when a line of gunboats came under heavy fire, Nevada fired upon the offending battery ashore until it was silenced. On the 19th D-Day, Nevada provided the pre-invasion rolling barrage and covered the 5th Marines as they went ashore. She stayed off Iwo Jima until March 7th, providing fire support during the day and firing star shells at night to help break up Japanese counterattacks. She then retired to prepare for the upcoming Okinawa campaign. On March 24th, Nevada and her bombardment group commenced the pre-invasion bombardment of Okinawa. 3 days later, on the 27th, while void of air cover, Nevada was struck in the vicinity of her No. 3 turret by a kamikaze. 11 were killed and 49 wounded in the attack. Turret 3 was damaged, as were 3 20mm mounts and 2 of the ship's Kingfisher float planes. April 1st saw Nevada providing fire support for the 1st Marine Division as she shelled Japanese airfields, shore defenses, supply dumps, and troop concentrations throughout the day. Several days later, she was struck by 5 rounds from a shore battery. 2 men were killed and 17 wounded. Nevada replied with her 14-inch guns and silenced the enemy battery promptly. Despite her damage, she remained on station off Okinawa until April 14th, when she received orders to Pearl Harbor via Guam for repairs and an overhaul. After her overhaul, she bombarded the bypassed Jaluit Atoll on June 18th. After silencing Japanese counter-battery fire in short order, Nevada closed to 4,000 yards and methodically raked the island, destroying her designated targets. She then proceeded to Okinawa, where she returned to the gun line to provide fire support to the troops ashore. In July, Nevada ventured into the East China Sea to conduct preparatory operations for the invasion of Japan. She was retiring to the Philippines when word of the Japanese capitulation came, and she departed for California on September 23rd. In November, she was designated for the experimental atomic bomb tests to be conducted at Bikini Atoll in mid-1946. Test Able on July 1st was an airburst, and Nevada was the bombardier's target. Test Baker was an underwater detonation on July 25th. Despite extensive damage and contamination from the tests, she proved once again to be a resilient ship and survived both blasts. Nevada returned to Pearl Harbor and was decommissioned on August 29th. In the end, it took a lot to finally sink her off the Hawaiian coast on July 31st, 1948. Naval gunfire, including the 16-inch guns of USS Iowa, couldn't do it alone, so she was hit with several aerial bombs, torpedoes, and rocket fire before finally slipping beneath the surface that afternoon. She was stricken from the Naval Vessel Register on August 12, 1948. On May 11, 2020, her wreck was discovered at a depth of 15,400 feet, about 65 nautical miles southwest of Pearl Harbor. She lies upside down, with her hull carrying the scars of shell fire and torpedo hits. A large debris field with her turrets, which fell off the ship as she capsized, is nearby, and her hull number 36 is still visible on her stern. She was a grand ship, both revolutionary and resilient, but it was her gallant men and their doggedness and resiliency which made her the fine fighting ship that she was. Thank you for watching. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, comment and subscribe so that we can bring you more content just like this.